change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Welcome back, everyone, to the official first episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast. You can't see us, but for those of you who can't see us, Nathan and I are wearing matching shirts to highlight the occasion.
Like when we know we're official, right? I mean, you're not official until you get matching shirts. So yeah,
we have swag. We have a uniform.
Right, exactly.
And we also have really cool stuff to talk about. So we're going to, again, keep this a short episode, but a lot of things that we want to touch on. Probably start with Nathan and I just got back from the Microsoft Global Nonprofits Leader Summit. It was actually their inaugural summit held in Bellevue, just right outside of Seattle. And just a really awesome conference. I was sharing, Nathan, with you earlier. I don't think I've left a summit as jazzed up as I did from this one, right? It just really covered all the bases. It was all about nonprofits, all about artificial intelligence, identifying tons of interesting use cases of how to apply it, how to be more efficient with your work, how to be able to outreach to more individuals, just do your mission, complete your mission that much more successful and more efficiently, and a lot of focus on doing it responsibly as well, right? So addressing some of the concerns, knowing that there's not definitive answers, but it's all conversation about how to employ it responsibly, what are the things to look out for, and a wonderful list of speakers, including Trevor Noah and Dr. Fei-Fei Li. So for me, it was probably a top 5 conference. Just super excited and can't wait till next year's. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, we were talking before that, most conferences we go to are either, say, for-profit conferences on AI. And of course, they're all about AI. And most of them have very little information on responsible AI. And then we go to nonprofit conferences that just have very little information about AI at all. And so I think what surprised me the most, actually, probably 2 things. One is that just the number of people that came from all over the world. Like there were 1,500 people, I think in person, but then I think I heard that like 8,000 people that tuned in virtually from all over the world, but like 1,500 people. I mean, you were having dinner with people from Switzerland. We were having lunch with people from Australia and the Netherlands. And it was just Canada. It was just amazing to have so many different people with so many diverse perspectives come together. I think that was one surprise. And, kudos to Microsoft for just pulling this off, first time ever for this inaugural conference. But the other thing was, I didn't even know that this is a conference about AI. Like, I don't know if your expectation was that we were going to come and that's all we're going to talk about, right. But based on the name, I mean, we knew who was speaking. So largely, directionally, we're like, okay, of course. And, Bing and Copilot's kind of a big deal for Microsoft, but Microsoft's a really big company. And so when Microsoft Nonprofit says, hey, we're going to do this global nonprofit leader summit, I mean, it could have been about leadership. It could have been about anything. And man, from the very first session to the very end was just like AI infused in everything. And with that, it was also responsible AI infused in everything, which I was just, tickled because, I mean, we've been on this journey for several years on educating, population to really, don't use the word AI without the word responsible in front of it. And they really did. Like talk is talk, but they talked a lot about responsible AI and their framework for responsible AI and why, AI governance is important. So for me, total home run from those perspectives. I don't know, Scott. So for you, was there any like session or people or conversation that you had that just kind of like stuck with you a little bit?
I mean, it was definitely the conversations just from, like you were saying, other attendees, just meeting a lot of people that I've been following on LinkedIn, but also people that are doing such incredible work. We had lunch with Doctors Without Borders. We had lunch with Resource Alliance and International Fundraising Council or Conference. So really exciting to see all the good that people are doing, all the networks and how they're spreading out their message. And again, those who are using AI to do it. But I agree with your statement, even in the reception, right? When it's just gathering and networking, they had these huge placards of how do you talk about responsible AI? What sectors are going to be most impacted, most increase efficiency and so on. So it really through and through, everything was highlighting the need for responsible AI and getting that conversation going. And
It's so encouraging too. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I think it, as a result, we didn't plan for this. Well, we did plan for this, but we had the fundraising AI meeting for a small group of people, right? And not realizing that this conference was going to be, again, all about AI and all about responsible AI. So it really was a perfect segue into that conversation that we had at the end of it.
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to, it was the very first, plenary, and their plenary, it was actually like 3 plenaries all kind of mashed together. And during that, I forget who was kicking it off, but went through a few. Fundraising AI got a shout out from stage among other associations that were present. Of course, like IFC that you just talked about through Resource Alliance and Giving Tuesday and all the other great associations. And then the last, and it was referenced as like an emerging associations like Fundraising AI are here. And that was just, really, really cool. And
Very cool.
Again, we're going to be doing this at lots of conferences from Salesforce to Amazon and others and Blackbaud, but it was great to have Microsoft ratify or just kind of position up Fundraising AI for our position on responsible AI for fundraising. And even to the point, we'll transition to what you're just commenting on, that Microsoft called us, I don't know, a month or so, 2 months before, and said, hey, would you like a special room dedicated so that you can have some, whatever type of meeting for fundraising AI you'd want. And we'll get you the room, and you can do this at the end of the conference. And it just turned out to be amazing. So even that foresight to say, I know you guys were going to want to talk about this, we're going to set this up, which allowed us to invite around the 20 people that we strategically chose to have a really strategic conversation around the future of fundraising AI and where are we, meeting the needs of the sector, and where do we need to go and where do we need to focus. So yeah, why don't you transition into like kind of your perspectives on that? Because it was a really good meeting, but it wasn't like an easy meeting, I guess, in my perspective.
No, I mean, it definitely wasn't an easy meeting, but I don't think we were planning for it to be easy, right? We were planning for it to be a conversation and bringing people in from all different sides of the table, right? There were nonprofits there were vendors there were competing vendors there. So it was a distinct group of people that have all different opinions, all different perspectives. And really talking about last year, we had the first summit. You and Mallory Erickson, again, kudos to both you. You really made that out of basically nothing and brought 6,000 people together to talk about responsible AI for fundraising specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation was really about what does 2024 look like? Is it just a one and done thing? Do we continue that conversation? Was there value in it? And how do we make sure that we're staying front and center about all the things that need to go on? So there's a lot of talk of, is it for nonprofits or is it for vendors? The framework is something that I, as working at a nonprofit, might not be able to abide by because it doesn't mean anything. I'm not sourcing any of that data. I'm not building transparent models. So it really set the stage for what do we need to address this year, right? What do we review from what we did last year? And how can we just continue to move this thing forward and provide as much value to our sector as possible?
Yeah. And for those that don't know Fundraising AI, I mean, it truly is the most grassroots type of organization you can imagine. I mean, it is made up of individuals from, to Scott's point, corporations, from nonprofits and kind of everything in between, coming together to say, hey, we believe that there's a gap and a need, not just to assume, hey, Microsoft responsible, Salesforce, Amazon, others are responsible, therefore I'm responsible. And this idea was that, Fundraising AI could come in as essentially this third party validator to curate conversations between tech in this agnostic way. So like we're tech agnostic. So like curate conversations between tech and the nonprofit sector. And I think it was really healthy. And maybe I walked into the meeting a little bit nervous. I had lots of notes and I, ended up turning it into a blog on my 3-hour flight home yesterday. But it was coming to the meeting with this idea of like, look, this is not my full-time job. This is not anyone's full-time job. This is something that we do because we're passionate about it. And we believe that our sector needs it. So therefore we should approach it every time with like, hey, are we done? Right. And so I think first and foremost, I wanted to come to this meeting about like, oh, look how great we are. We have 6,000 people from 38 countries. And, it's like this like rocket ship of this thing. I wanted to approach it from, are we done? Did we fulfill our mission? Because the hope of every nonprofit should be that you put yourself out of business, that you've satisfied your mission to the point that your mission, that you've solved homelessness or hunger or whatever it might be. That's the dream for every nonprofit. And I think it's really healthy for us to come there. And I think, I know what your observations were. And you mentioned like, different tech people and competing tech people, and even different associations were there who have their own communities as well coming together. I don't know. What do you think was the kind of the not clarity, but the clear direction of like, hey, we did this thing last year and it was cool. like what's in front of us in the future, do you think?
I think for me, what I'm most excited about is I think there was a lot of clarity, like you mentioned, right? Fundraising AI really started as there needs to be this framework for responsible AI, right? But then the summit was split up into practitioners and into platforms, right? So people were coming on speaking to certain audiences, but it wasn't this is one thing and it's for everybody, right? There are certain
Right.
components of it for the fundraising side, certain components of it for the vendor side. And I think really making sure that we can provide resources where appropriate to both teams, right? To have those nonprofits come in and know what's going on in AI, know what's going on with vendors and who is being responsible, making sure that it's kind of like somebody referenced the organic certification, right? You may not need to know what that means, right? All the tests that have to go through to confirm, but you know that if I'm purchasing this, this is better for me. This does not use pesticides. This does not use, genetically modified organisms. So I'm going to be better off by using this product as opposed to this non-organic product.
Yeah. And it also came up the conversation of like, well, this framework, there's 10 things in this framework and they're a little bit burdensome. And I think your comment was, well, this wasn't intended to be easy, right? I mean, when we're going to do something, I think you use the analogy of like getting your driver's license. It's like, oh, well, I'm not going to make it easier on you because like, you're going to use less of it than someone else. Like if we're all going to drive, we all have to, satisfy the requirements of getting the driver's license. And there's so many parallels in this and how also I was thinking about this on the flight home yesterday is that, responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. It's not just big tech's responsibility. And we shouldn't just allow big tech to determine what responsible AI is for us. But like, any person who gets a driver's license gets behind the wheel, it's not only the other car's responsibility. It's not only the car manufacturer's responsibility. It's also my responsibility that I'm going to drive in a safe manner that is not going to do harm to the people around me. And it's through that conversation of fundraising AI, it really came to me that really came clear. And I think if anything, when we pose a question of like, oh, are we done? Like, do we not need to do another summit? And we can just do other things. We have a podcast and we have other ways of communicating and we can create distributed content through the other associations. The reaction was kind of interesting because it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like there's 6,000 people that like are like, they signed up and they want more information. Like you can't just abandon them. That surprised me a little bit. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I mean, I don't know if I was too surprised, but I think in answering that question, somebody mentioned we need to continue to have this, right? Because it needs to be self-regulated. We can't wait for someone else to make decisions for the nonprofit sector of what is responsible in our language to our people, right? So we need to continue pushing this conversation forward. And in light of that, not only did we have this fundraising AI meeting at the Global Summit, but we also had a recap with the framework committee to review the framework,
right?
Making sure that it is staying on top of current events, of current trends, of what is responsible, what isn't, and that we don't ever let this document or these tenets get stale, right? And just say, all right, well, that's done. We're just going to keep moving on and doing podcasts and doing global summits, but not really address the core of it, of that defining how to apply and build responsible AI. So that was another thing that went on kind of behind the scenes, making sure that we're staying up to date with that as well.
So I think that's a great recap of the Microsoft Nonprofit Global Leaders Summit. In addition to the Fundraising AI strategic planning session that we had, I think we left with clarity on like, there's a lot more to do. Until the word responsible is ubiquitous with the letters AI, we have work to do. And at a certain point in the future where we hope that is the future, where there is no AI that, isn't responsible, and our job will be done. But until then, we've got work to do. Let's transition over because there's been some other couple of things. And we only have a few more minutes, for this podcast, but there's been some other really big developments this week, with the EU proposing or essentially finally finishing their AI safety guidelines, which are going to have like massive fines attached to them if people don't adhere to them, and how AI essentially is going to be graded on a scale from like, this does a lot of harm to this really doesn't do any harm. And so that's coming. And then in parallel with that, I got a text from one of our clients this week who is in a session and he heard a conversation, Eric Schmidt, who's former CEO of Google, who basically said, now that he's no longer at Google, he and I'll kind of read this, but he basically said that next 3 to 5 years, AI is going to swallow humanity or whatever. And Eric Schmidt is now thinking a lot more about the role of philanthropy. And I've also been thinking a lot more about the role of philanthropy because there was a study from the IMF that came out like 2 weeks ago that said 60% of jobs are going to be impacted in developed nations. And then it in all nations, but in developed nations, and it's like 30% in developing nations and things like that. There's no doubt that, what was is not what will be. Like the world will never be the same. So with that, and when the IMF study concluded, is that AI is here and it's here to stay and it's going to impact jobs. It's also going to create inequity. So I think about the Eric Schmidt comment. I think about IMF and their report and how, that inequity is going to increase. And it's hard to not really imagine a future where if that happens, that the role of philanthropy will be more important than ever. So I don't know your thoughts on that. And I know you shared with me last week that statement about just the amount of content that is expected to be created artificially. Like, how does that all play into, this role that we live in this kind of unique space of technology and philanthropy? And I think it's never been more important, at least me personally, our role has never been more important than it is today. And it's going to increase over time.
Agreed. Yeah. And that kind of came up back to the conference, that came up as well, right? Someone mentioned, like you said, that the goal of a nonprofit is to put itself out of business, right? To solve a challenge that needs to be addressed and make sure that it is done and it is no longer a challenge, no longer an opportunity for need, right? But I think while AI can solve a lot of those challenges, like climate crisis, it can provide unique solutions to that. It also is going to create more of this gap between the haves and the have-nots, right? And it's going to put out more and more content. If we had to put a percentage of how much of AI is going to be used to addressing good versus just creating things, right? I'd say 15% is going to go towards serving good, right? Or doing good. The rest is just going to be content creation, right? Maybe creating efficiencies. Sam Altman just said, I think yesterday, I saw something where he said, him and his team have a bet of when the first single person billion-dollar company is going to come out. The fact that that's even possible is only because of AI, right? And I assure you, it's probably not going to be a billion-dollar company because it's addressing a world need or a world challenge, right? It's going to be maybe solving for something else, but probably more on the side of media, consumerism, something along those lines. So I think we do have this expansive goal of solving problems, but that isn't going to go away. I think we're going to find more and more opportunities to solve problems in unique ways, but the sector is going to be needed for a very long time.
Yeah, I think more and more. I think we'll see the impact of it. And I think that's why we need people that are going to tune in for this podcast to really look and understand and learn how technology can, support humanity's greatest challenges. Because as the world kind of dives in this deep end of the pool of generative AI, and I saw on GitHub this morning, there's this Vim GPT where basically they're programming GPT to just do all your tasks, like the agents idea of what that OpenAI has been talking about for a while. And as soon as, you can start to program these Vim GPTs to generate money, it's going to change the landscape on what equality and inequality is. And so, it's been an interesting week with all of that from the responsible AI side, having a kind of trusted third party in the middle of saying, hey, like this stuff's really cool and we enjoy it. Actually, why don't we'll end on the example we were talking about this morning, which was your new favorite browser. And this is it, right? This is the rub and this is the allure of gosh, these advances happen faster than our ability to understand or adapt to them. So let's just talk about it, because I think even you and I, who are always on this lens of is this good or bad? But also being on the forefront of trying new things, right? Pushing the envelope a little bit. So why don't we end on that story and then, maybe we'll tie it in with an antidote about how it's important just to take one step in front of the other, just take one step and another step before we just say, okay, I'm going to abandon everything and just jump in.
Yeah. So the what you're referencing is Arc, this new browser by the browser company, which browser company announced maybe a year or two ago that they were going to start this new initiative of creating a browser for, current times, right? Google hasn't changed too much in how they're providing Chrome since it came out 15 years ago or whatever. So they're going to take a novel approach on browsers, and with the advent of LLMs, they really push that forth. So Arc is a browser I think it's specific to iOS, maybe Android, but I don't think you can get it on your laptop or your computer yet. It came out maybe 3 days ago, right? Of course I saw it, I downloaded it. I'm like, well, this is clearly the coolest thing ever.
And we're like, oh, have you tried it? Have you seen it?
Right.
I heard you talk about the other day.
Yeah.
As you normally do. like new stuff. Yeah.
Right. I feel like I'm browsing things more now just to test it out and see like, what is this whole thing about? But it kind of has that agent built in where instead of saying, I wanted a restaurant for my wife for Valentine's Day that has vegetarian options. And instead of just creating a list of all these different things and ads thrown in there, it found, okay, here's these options, here's these ratings. And they made it, it's like I asked an assistant to do it and they put together a report for me. And I thought it was just the coolest thing. I brought it up to you today and you said, well, did you read that article about how people asked it to find good areas to hide dead bodies in Los Angeles? So I click on that link. It just came out today. So this is just how fast things move, right? It could be incredibly helpful and then 24 hours later, it could be used for bad. But I think that really speaks to artificial intelligence, right? Like it's not good or bad, right? Just like fire isn't good or bad. Fire can warm you and cook a meal, but it could also ravage an entire city, right? So it's all about how it's used and whether or not the people behind it or the people using it even are applying it in responsible ways.
I think that's a great wrap up for this session, for us to be able to just get on this call, talk about what's current, what's going on today, shed a little bit of perspective, at least our insight on, is this something that, will benefit us or not, or should we kind of wait and see? And realizing that the advancements are so fast and there's so many of them. We hope that this becomes a trusted resource for you to be like, cut through all that noise and be like, okay, what is Fundraising AI's take on this thing that happened last week? And, is it something that I should spend more time on or should I just wait and see? So it's been great being able to talk with you, Scott. I mean, we do this pretty much every day anyway, but it's awesome to be able to do this. And I hope that if you like this, please like it, share it with others. And if you don't like it, please don't tell anyone. We're happy to be here and be your guides through this applied AI for fundraising journey. I guess we'll just call it a journey.
Yeah. And I'm glad, just in wrapping up, I'm glad that we decided fundraising AI should still continue to exist because now it justifies wearing these cool shirts.
I mean, what would we do with the shirts otherwise, right?
Right.
Exactly. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Next time.